Okay, I'm going to make a start. Welcome to the Who's Streets panel. So the aims of this session are to widen the framing of our anti-billboard work, our anti-outdoor advertising work that Ad-Free Cities does, and place it within a wider movement where activists and communities are reclaiming public space as an act of resistance. So the speakers we're going to hear from are talking about how they've done that in different ways. So we'll hear about how other campaigns are creating and engaging in debates on how public space should be used, could be used, isn't being used. Ad-Free Cities Network, we are interested in how we can reclaim public spaces from corporate advertising for communities. That's kind of what we're broadly interested in. And instead, maybe we could have things like food growing, community art, nature, community events and activism. Like, what other things could we have in that space that is currently being used for corporate advertising? And we've explored the links between advertising and street harassment, for example, which is going to be talked about in a minute. We did a resource called Selling Sexism, and we sort of looked at how the idea of a culture of entitlement is promoted by some advertising visual imagery, which can lead to real world consequences. So adverts aren't just there, they're leading to like actual social issues that people are impacting on people every day. So, for example, such imagery can send an implicit message that women's bodies are public property, which are there to serve and please. By reinforcing these stereotyped ideas of masculinity and femininity, they also seek to punish those who don't conform to those presets. So there are high levels of reported street harassment incidents experienced by LGBTQ plus communities, for example. And then if there's an advert of like a lovely family having their Tesco lunch or whatever next door, it's like, well, you're not that. This is also the same for other bodies, other types of bodies, and reveals advertising's role in a patriarchal, racist, and oppressive system, which constantly enforces inequalities and damaging stereotypes, which creates consequences for society in terms of the normalization of violence, harassment, and discrimination. So this is the kind of context that we're talking about, widening out the context from just adverts on the street. These are some of the issues that our speakers are going to be talking about now, and there'll be time for questions at the end. So I'm going to introduce our amazing speakers. We've got Ros Martin, who is a writer, poet, playwright, and a literary-based arts activist and a creative producer. As an activist, she's co-founder of Countering Colston, Glad Colston's Gone, and Chalk for Change, which is the public street chalking project, promoting International Women's Day, International Workers' Day, and Emancipation Day every year, with street pavement chalking engaging with the public wherever that's happening. And that's happened in Bristol, Vancouver, Lagos, and Berlin. Our other speaker is Katie Finnegan-Clarke. She is an anti-street harassment activist. She set up Bristol Against Street Harassment, has worked with Hollaback London and Good Night Out, and the Good Night Out campaign, and Stop Telling Women to Smile. She's also a Reclaim the Night protest organiser and works on anti-police harassment with a focus on stop and search as well. So they're going to be talking about their activism around reclaiming public spaces, and then we can have a discussion. So over to you, Ros.
Hi.
Is that one on?
Can you hear me? Well, thank you for inviting me to share along with Katie. When I was thinking about today, I was thinking, what is it about public spaces that they've changed so much? Certainly, when I was growing up in the 60s, not very far from here, that's where we lived. We hung out all the time. We knew every nook and cranny. But nowadays, it feels like a space where you're not supposed to hang around. You're moved on. If you're the most marginalised, it's just, I don't know what it's become. Anyway, they are public spaces and are there to be reclaimed. The Chalking for Change actually came about through a young student in Bristol who was arrested, fingerprinted and put in a cell for chalking. As the buildings go up, the wages go down on the super deluxe Cabot Circus soon after it had been raised. It was advertised in the local paper, well, publicised. He managed to get a lot of publicity. Myself and another activist who's a little bit older than us, she's 86, said, "Have you seen this? Come on, let's go along and support outside the magistrate's court." Of course, it was thrown out. So we started talking outside, let justice prevail, have a voice, whatever. And we thought, wow, is this just amazing? Isn't this fun? Just talks. So linking up with him, we decided that we would go out and do that on a regular occasion. The 3 occasions already mentioned. And I thought, wherever I am in the world, that's what I will do. There are issues around safety, kind of what is a place like if you don't know it and you're right. So there are precautions. I always go with someone else. If I'm abroad with obviously a local person, let them know we're going to be out or link up with something that's going on. As there's specific days, there usually are things going on, particularly around International Women's Day and International Workers' Day. In fact, you get comments like, "Oh my goodness, you mark this in Bristol?" Particularly when there's a lot of overseas traffic in the centre. The centre's the normal location we have by the fountains, and it's usually for about an hour. The point is to engage with passerby. I mean, normally I'm stuck by the computer, I'm kind of writing with my head down. And for me, it's an opportunity to actually go out and actually see where people are and find some way of having a conversation. Yeah, what's going on for you today? It's a way of educating people and reclaiming space. If the sun's shining, it's extraordinary fun. Children are very much encouraged to draw, to paint. And no, it's not a free crash for some people, seem to think it's okay to leave their kids. Um, what was I going to say about it? I actually come with a few ideas of things I might want to write, but obviously over the years, it's easier to come up with things. Encourage people with quotes, it could be a line from a song to draw. I'm not a drawer, so it's not necessarily advertised. It's always quite low key because it's quite nice just for it to be organic and, and it's a family occasion. Older people often need persuasion to come with their own thoughts and reflections. Younger children, they're just down on the ground. And it's a lovely chance to engage with people. I do remember on International Workers' Day, there was a guy who was in a suit. People are always rushing by, that's the other thing. So you're trying to get people to slow down and just say, "Can I have a few moments of your time? 2 minutes? 3 minutes?" Sometimes people surprise you and just spend a whole hour. It's normally not longer than an hour or 90 minutes. Although I have to say, there were 2 12-year-old cousins who loved it so much. I kind of stayed on kind of for them. When we first started, it wasn't the police that came to stop. It was a council officer with a clipboard. "Have you had permission? This is public space. um, we are watching you. We have cameras." So I proceeded to write, "Cameras here, cameras there, cameras following you everywhere." Yes. Strange enough, on that occasion, and that was about 2009, the first endeavour, the police actually came along, local beat, and the council guy then actually got someone from the cleansing department with some water machine and started clearing. And the police actually said, "Leave them alone." So it very much depends who comes along. I mean, there have been occasions over the years where we've been moved on. It's never my intention to be arrested. Um, and it's not criminal damage. Although I did find myself in a police cell last year for criminal damage to the pavement by chalking. I always come with water and a sponge. And the only rule is never write anything offensive. And it's kind of washed on. So I was shaken up. It was an illegal arrest and protest linked up to the Colston for campaign, and we did manage to get compensation from the police. It did shake me up a bit because, I'm 61, I've got rheumatoid arthritis, and I hadn't planned to be in a cell for 6 hours. But, I kind of thought, How dare they? I am back talking. And with Julie, who's 86. Um, I'm just going to share some of the quotes around um, kind of what's gone up, really. I have said the 3 days I go out, haven't I? International Women's Day, International Workers' Day, and Emancipation Day. It can be in any language, and the idea is to make it low key and fun and interventional. It's just amazing. People stay for ages and chat, and you're going to see people that you never see before. I'm sure I'm getting a bit of amnesia. Did I tell you about a guy once who stopped? It was International Workers' Day, so encouraging people to stop and reflect. You could have a job, you could be without a job, what work means. It could be local issues around work practices, that are unsafe. It could be something that's in the news. It could be something global that's been in the news. Because it's also about our common humanity. So the international links are important. Anyway, he was in a suit with a woman. He kind of went past, then came back, and then he stopped. And he said, I've thought what I want to write. I was made redundant recently. And I said, oh, what are you doing? I'm working on myself. It's the best work you can do. And I said, well, put that down. Or do you want me to put it down? And people feel really chuffed. They come up with something, they do think. And you do get people who say, isn't it vandalism? And I say, can't you remember being a child? It's playing like being a child. Obviously it's been a long time for you, but that's all we're doing. We're just having a bit of fun. And look, the rain will wash it off. I'm just trying to think because some of the quotes anyway. So anyone can take part. You meet people that you've never met before. Sometimes you get people say, this is where I'm supposed to be. And I urge you, wherever you are, it's very easy to do. As well as those particular days, obviously use it as part of protest. It was quite integral for me in expressing myself as part of the county in Colston. So when we were at the cathedrals, outside the cathedrals, where school children were, for all intents and purposes, Katie could speak of because she was from the school, worshipping Colston. I'd be outside, there'd be a few of us just talking. And the girls were engaged, they did come and, give out leaflets and kind of get people to think, with statements, really. Anyway, trying to think if I covered everything I want to say. Something you'd like to share, someone to remember, a struggle, a quote, memories, draw, symbols, offload. And some of them, I do keep and repeat. I'm not free why any woman is unfree, even when her shackles are very different from my own. That's Audre Lorde, Friedrich Douglass. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did and never will. Man-made, real and dangerous racism. Sometimes there are things that come up with conversations with people or people I know, really. As long as you keep a person down, some part of you has to be down there to hold him down. That's Marian Anderson. We are called to assist the earth to heal her wounds and in the process heal our own. Anyone know who that is? Wangari Maathai. Lines for songs, or make your own up, really. Yesterday, today, tomorrow, the struggle is the same. Or questions? Reclaim the streets, anyone? It's about encouraging people with their own thinking, ideas. There's no right or wrong, as long as nothing's offensive. I can remember being asked into the school to actually do a session on protest. I said, can we go out in the playground and actually do some chalking? It was humming and ahhing, humming and ahhing. And they finally said yes. It was a secondary school. And, it seemed like it was the children who were least engaged in schooling. The sun was out. The dinner ladies passed by. I said, can you stop and contribute something? And they did. The teachers were down on the ground as well. And the children, once they kind of, relaxed, kind of opened up and share things, actually things they wouldn't otherwise share, really. It's not vandalism, yeah. And finally, freedom is what you do with what is being done to you. Anyone know that one? Jean-Paul Sartre? Yeah. I think that's it, really. I'll just encourage you and use it for protests, EDL, countering the EDL. I can't actually do marches these days, so I either might go at the beginning or at the end and do a chalk kind of intervention. Okay, so there we are. Chalk for change.
Hi, everyone. Oh, yeah, there we go. I've done a really old school PowerPoint. So my name's Katie. I sort of got involved in the anti-billboard movement, and it really reminded me of a lot of the other campaigns that I've been involved in. And I'm going to go through some of them in a minute. I think the anti-billboard movement and ad-free cities and the ad block groups, I would encourage you to be thinking of yourself as part of a wider movement that's about social justice, and that I'll go through the campaigns and we can look at where there are overlaps and where there are lessons to be learnt from other campaigns and where there are lessons to be learnt in terms of the mistakes of other campaigns as well. But yeah, I sort of wanted to do this panel because I wanted to have a space to talk about the wider movement of social justice, public spaces, and how to build coalitions between different campaigns that are also working in a similar area to ad block groups. So I've been a grassroots campaigner since I was 14, led a schools walkout over the Iraq War, and have been going ever since. And yeah, I think something to note is that when I was growing up, I was brought up on a street that was very community-minded, and we did lots and lots of mosaicing in the street, we did lots of chalking, the children played out in the road, and I think I was quite lucky in that sense, and I think that formulated my later campaigning. I've always felt very passionate about getting out into the streets, out into public space, and looking at what's going on in those public spaces. So, yeah, fighting sexism in public spaces. I was a street harassment campaigner for many years. Do you want to go on to the next thing? Yeah. So we've done lots of different stuff, direct action, so taking to the streets. Women going out into the spaces where they experience harassment is incredibly powerful. So I've helped organise Reclaim the Night marches, and also Reclaim the Path marches in Bristol, because there's a lot of harassment on a cycle path. And there's something really healing about that, about a group of women getting together and taking up space and making noise in the areas where they're actually experiencing harassment. I think if you've experienced critical mass, you'll know what that feels like. So if you cycle around London, for example, and you're experiencing it as potentially life-threatening activity, cycling around, and then you go out as a big group and you feel like you have ownership over the road, it is very healing, and it's also very empowering. So that's what I try and explain what Reclaim the Night is like for women. We also do lots of annual fly posting actions. So this was started by Titania Faladze from New York. So she started the Stop Telling Women to Smile campaign. So all over the world, there's an annual fly posting action, and I've coordinated this in London and in Bristol over a few years. So we print out posters, we meet up as a group of women, and we go to the places specifically where we've experienced harassment to put up these posters in the spots where we've actually experienced that sexism. And again, it's really, really healing, and it also just helps spread the message, and we get really good response. So you can see people tweet on the bottom right there, you can see some of the tweets that people share. So yeah, that's another way of, that's another intervention. And then I coordinated Hollaback London. So this is a kind of technological intervention to harassment. So there was an app called the Hollaback app, and women could report the harassment they had experienced through the app, and it would be mapped onto a kind of Google map with the details of the harassment and any photos and videos of the harassment as well. As a campaigner, this is really, really useful in terms of evidencing something that is so prominent but also invisible. And it also helped us open up a lot of doors. We did a lot of work with British Transport Police, Uber, nightclubs. Lots and lots of different big institutions wanted to talk to us because we had evidence of the harassment that was happening. So this was really useful. And I have wondered about this in terms of billboard activism as well. I know because billboards change so much, if there was some way of creating a platform where people could report different types of billboard themes or like take photos and then upload it onto a central map. So that was something that I thought about. And all of this activism I just talked about was pre the Me Too movement. So now harassment is much more widely understood, and just when we were doing this activism, people didn't really believe that sexual harassment even happened, whereas now it's understood that it's happened and it's taken much more seriously. So yeah, I think in some ways I'd say the harassment campaigning I was doing was quite successful. I will talk about other ones that wasn't so successful in a minute. Oh yeah, and also we did training. So I founded the Good Night Out campaign. So we run a training program, still going in London and across the UK. So nighttime venues could become accredited, so they get training on sexual harassment, they put up the posters, they put in policies in place, and then they become a Good Night Out venue. And actually the Electric Brixton one just finished their training a few weeks ago. We used to do bystander intervention training as well around street harassment. So again, yeah, using that kind of training space, and that was a way for we could raise money for the campaign through selling that training. So I don't know if there's ways of thinking about that in terms of anti-billboard, anti-corporations, going in, running training around greenwash maybe, and using that to fund your activities. So fighting racism and police violence. We'll talk about countering Colston more. Both Ros and I were really involved in countering Colston for many years. But yeah, so quickly talk about that. So that's, for me, all about reclaiming public spaces. I went to Colston Girls' School. Unfortunately, I had lots of first-hand experience of the quite cultish nature of celebrating Colston. And a small group of us got together and founded Countering Colston 8 years ago. But for me, it was always about reclaiming the public space away from this figure of white supremacy and trying to create public spaces that centered social justice and that were welcoming for all. And that was, again, it's all about, the street harassment was the same in a way. It's about thinking about who feels like they have power in our public spaces? Does everyone feel comfortable in our public spaces? What's happening when we all gather together, what's happening? So yeah, countering Colston was actually really successful. Lots of successes along the way, including my old school has announced its name change, so it's now Montpellier High. But we used a lot of different tactics, petitions, lobbying, chalking, awareness raising, and doing lots and lots of documenting again. So I think this is a real lesson from Countering Colston. It's all about documenting the real history and doing really, really deep dive research and getting that information out there, because there was very little information really about what Colston really did in the mainstream. So yeah, lots of wins there. And then Justice for Judah. Ras Judah is an elderly Rastafarian man who lived around the corner from me, ironically on Colston Street. And he was attacked by PC Claire Bodie while he was walking his dog at 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning, just walking around the area where we live. And he was tasered near the neck. And 18 people have been killed by the police in this way since they brought in tasers about 8 years ago. So incredibly dangerous, and Priti Patel's pushing out tasers, and it's a whole nother talk. But again, this felt like really, really important for obvious reasons, but also because it was all about this man who had the right to walk around safely. And I really feel strongly that actually what the work that the anti-billboard movement's doing is about trying to increase the well-being of communities. And I think you should be linking up with people who are looking at police harassment, because that's also about increasing well-being of communities. I think there's potentially some fruitful relationships to be built there. So yeah, we used petition. We ran really amazing kind of open community meetings, which were really motivating and built lots of relationships and really good for media coverage. Got lots and lots of media coverage. And then the Stop and Search Legal project as well was something that I coordinated. Oh, okay. My slides have been lost. Oh well. Stop and Search Legal project is again a training program that still runs in London. So it's going into schools and youth clubs and running Know Your Rights training. So young people, so the average age of a black boy, the first time he'll be stopped by the police, his average age is 14. So it's about empowering, it's about trying to disrupt the power relations basically by sharing knowledge about your rights. And finally, this was a campaign that definitely didn't win. So I squatted in Brighton for a few years. And that was all about trying to tackle unaffordable housing and just house ourselves, basically. We set up the Squatters Network of Brighton, and that was in the face of the kind of criminalisation of squatting, which did get pushed through by Mike Weatherly, who's the Hove MP. But that was a really important lesson for me around how to build networks and how not to, because you had lots and lots of different people squatting for different reasons across the city, mostly like economic squatters, and we were very much like political squatters. And so we were trying to build a network, a practical network where we could turn up to each other's evictions and support each other, share food, share knowledge, legal advice, all this kind of thing. And basically the cultural norms within our group just meant that we didn't really know how to interact and build that network in a meaningful way. And basically squatting was criminalised. And when Mike Weatherly was pushing it through, he did specifically talk about the kind of political squatters. So I feel like that was really damaging, actually. The work that we did around like trying to stop the ban actually made it worse. So yeah, that was an example of something that didn't work. But yeah, again, that for me was about, it wasn't public space, but often we'd open squats and then open them to the public. So again, it was about space and who has the right to space and who has the right to be housed and so on. So yeah, when I thought about like doing this little intro, I was thinking about the lessons that I've learned from all those. And I think like for me, the only way to build meaningful change is to build alliances across different campaigns, which is the reason why it felt good to be having this panel here to sort of open up conversations within the room about like what other campaigns can the anti-billboard movement be building alliances with. And I think like part of the reason why Countering Colston was successful is because actually quite different types of people came together. Like none of us knew each other before. We hadn't come through, like, we all had an individual interest in it, and we'd come together just around that particular issue. There were lots of things that we didn't agree with each other on, I think would be fair to say. Like we mostly did agree about things, but there were people were interested in it for different reasons, but that was okay, you know? And I think, yeah, that was one of my lessons. Diversity of tactics, obviously the Colston statue got pulled down through direct action, and we'd been campaigning for many years before that to get it removed through the proper channels, and it just wasn't being removed. So yeah, I think like a diversity of tactics. So we had historians, artists, people doing direct action, people doing like behind the scenes lobbying work, joining boards, you know, just a real array of different tactics, and also like
Sides as well.
And changing sides.
Allegiances, yeah.
Yeah, we can talk about this in a minute. But yeah, and then I suppose also just like I think I have a really deep geographical connection to Bristol in particular, but when I was in London, like I have Irish family in London, and I think there's something about how can we reconnect people to their geographies, to their communities, to their physics, like how can we give people that feeling of you have a right to demand safety where you live? And that's like a big question that, yeah, it'd be good to explore. So yeah, that's pretty much it.